This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Hey, everybody. This is the second part of a multi-part episode. If you like what you're hearing, go like, subscribe, go check us out on YouTube. All the links to our social media and more can be found at beyondthebigscreen.com. So here we go. I'll move on to colors. Colors, I really loved it. I think it captured something of the age, even though it was a little cartoonish in some ways. And it was very, it painted the gangs, I think, a little cartoonishly. It didn't have the crisp edges. And then they insert a fake gang in there, and that becomes the ultimate antagonist. The Crips and the Bloods kind of melt away, and it's this gang, the 21 Street gang, who's, as far as I know, it wasn't a real gang. And I think just maybe to not get the Crips or the Bloods angry, they made up this fake gang. But I think that one of the things is that it never had a clear antagonist. There was the one guy, High Top, and then he flips, and then it switches over to Rocket, and you think that he's going to be sort of the Bond villain, but he doesn't turn into that. And then the ultimate enemy or the antagonist in the film is this gang that nominally was friendly with Robert Duvall and Sean Penn's character the whole movie. And you could in one way look at it was a clunky storytelling, but I think in a way it really shows that how complicated the streets were nobody was really your friend, nobody was your enemy either.
And a lot of relationships are very contextual. I ran into people that I had fought with and arrested in different settings, not off duty. I didn't have that happen very often, but while working, go to a party call or something, and he's just chilling there, and he's not being a jerk, and he's not under arrest, and he doesn't have a warrant. And we actually have a cordial conversation that's quasi-friendly. But we both know if I get behind his car and he's got a felony warrant, or he's holding drugs or a gun or something, that it's on, right? And we know he's going to run. We know he knows I'm going to chase him. He knows if he gets out and points his gun at me, I'm going to shoot. If he runs from the car, I'm going to chase him. If he throws a fist, I'm going to throw one too. And like, we both know that. And it's interesting. Some of these criminals that I came into contact with, there's kind of a code, and it's like, hey, I got slammed on the ground. I chased a guy down an alley one time, and I was all by myself. I was undercover. Well, I wasn't undercover exactly. We were plainclothes detail. And I jumped out of the car to chase one guy, and my partner jumped out to chase the other guy. And I go down this alley, and it's in a residential neighborhood. And I had my radio with me, but like a dumbass, I didn't flip the power on, because it was my handheld radio, because we weren't in a police car. We were in a undercover car. So I'm running down the alley telling my police radio and anybody within earshot that I'm running down an alley, but dispatch doesn't know, and my partner doesn't know because he's running down a different alley. So the guy turns down, it ends up being a blind alley. There's a fence at the other end, and the guy gets to the fence, and I'm pretty close to him. He grabs on the fence, tries to go over. And Chris, you would have been proud of me, man. I threw the best body check I'd ever thrown in my life. I just nailed him hard into the boards. Man, that fence shook like it was at the Spokane Arena or whatever. And the guy falls to the ground. I bounced back. I got up first and got up on top of him before he could get up. And he struggled a bit, but I had the advantage, and I got a good grip on him. And he realized it was like, it's either go all the way or give up at this point, because he's at a disadvantage. He gave up. I probably don't know if I was justified in slamming him into the fence like that, looking back. I mean, if he had complained, they might have argued that was excessive force. I should have grabbed him or something. Guy never said a peep. And as we're walking down the alley, he's kind of like, don't remember how he phrased it, but it was essentially good hit, kind of thing. I was like, hey, I ran, you caught me. That's the way it goes. And the habitual criminals kind of understood that. And but it's a tenuous contextual relationship, because if the tides had turned, I don't know that guy wouldn't have grabbed my gun, if he was looking at a long prison stretch, which he could have been, and so what happened in the movie was actually brilliant in that regard, because it really punctuated the fact that, the streets don't care. They don't care about you and your relationships, and the danger can come from anywhere. I mean, look at The Wire, right? Who killed Omar? Little Kennard, just an 8-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid, right? This is the big bad assassin of the show. You just never know where that's going to come from. And so in a way, I think it was pretty brilliant that friendliest of antagonists ended up being the one that pulled the trigger on the fatal bullet.
It's interesting you bring up like that, like the relationship between like the habitual criminal and the cops. I mean, if you listen to a lot of these mafia guys, is a lot of them don't necessarily hate the cops. It's, like I chose to be a criminal and you chose to be a cop, and we're on two different sides. But, I'm going to do my thing and you guys are going to do your thing. All we ask is be honest about it when you do get us, like don't plant evidence on us. Don't, make up charges. Like you're going to catch me doing criminal act. I'm more than fine doing the time, but actually catch me doing criminal act. And when I did, that's their opinions a lot of the times when these guys talk about it, is that's the way they view it. It's like, I'm on one side, I'm on the other side, just be honorable about it. That's all we ask.
Yeah. That goes a long way.
And that was one of the themes of the movie when you really got down to it, was this. And I think it was maybe a thing that was going in the zeitgeist at the time, is that there was a change in attitude, that there was maybe an honor amongst thieves and amongst cops and amongst everybody that was going away at that time. And the young characters, the Sean Penn cop, he was, at least initially in the movie, he was going to bust everybody, and he didn't grant any sort of mercy or have any thoughts. He was just going to get every collar he could, and he didn't really care if he made relationships or soured or anything. And then the gang members, the older ones, were the ones who wanted to work with the cops, and if they got busted, you got busted. I mean, they even had that scene where the leader of the 21 gang was in the precinct helping out the police. And then one of the cops walked by and he was like, "Oh, hey, you have a warrant." And he's like, "All right, cuff me and take me to jail." And there was an honor there. And then you see, as the movie develops, the young gangsters are absolutely bloodthirsty too, that they have no honor. And I think that was a theme that I think they were trying to play out, is that there's no, that nostalgia of the old day where we'll all work together. Hey, you got me, And, that, or if, I
won't get you on something that's chicken salad, right? I won't trump anything up on you. I won't get you on something that's piddly. It'll be a legit thing. And if it's a legit thing, then you'll be a man about it, that kind of thing. One of the things that you have in this show that is prevalent in all three is, and you have it on the outline too there, Steve, is partners riding together. And in every case, the examples seem to be the old veteran cop and the young, brash rookie or pretty new cop. In Training Day, he would be new as a detective, even though he's been on the job for a while. And that's a pretty common theme that you see or pretty common trope that you see in these movies. But I thought it was really well played in Colors. I mean, Robert De Niro, he had a lot of patience, but he wasn't suffering fools when it came to Sean Penn. And he recognized that character, I can't remember the character's name right now, but that Penn was, overly aggressive, and he didn't understand that you're just arresting him for stupid things that aren't going to go anywhere. And the only result from that arrest, besides padding your stats, is an erosion of trust. Whereas if you were to play it a little bit differently, you might get some goodwill there that you can bank, that somewhere down the line, maybe somebody actually tells you who dropped the gun in a homicide or, something along those lines. And a young guy like that just doesn't think that way. He's just all full of testosterone and and, lots of piss and vinegar and wants to just chase bad guys like a, thoroughbred hound or something. They're just so excited about it, but it's really well done because he does impart wisdom, Robert Duvall, but he also kind of is like exasperated with him at times too, I think. And if I remember the movie right, am I remembering right?
Yeah. Did you do 2 officer cars when you were a cop? Because I would think that, I don't know, I'm not, I think for somebody who's talkative, that would be the best thing in the universe. But I could also see that after about an hour, you've said everything that could possibly be said. And if you have somebody who won't shut up the whole time, that could be more annoying than actually going for criminals.
We had 1 officer cars for the majority of my career. So when you got to double up and ride with a partner, if staffing allowed or special detail was going on or something like that, it was a treat. Basically, it was a cool thing. And it absolutely what you described is true. If you were assigned to work with someone and you didn't get along or they were annoying or they like to talk and you preferred silence or the radio or whatever, well, that just go on a road trip with somebody you don't like and imagine that 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, every week, all year long. But if you are partnered with somebody you chose to partner with and you work well together, it is, it's incredible. It's like being on a line with a hockey line with somebody that you just know where the other guy is and you hit him with a pass and he, shoot pass, score, that kind of a thing. You're safer because you know where the other guy is. You know how he's going to play it. You learn each other's sort of tells. And so you can communicate without directly speaking and so forth. And we used to work 410s. And so we had a sister platoon that worked our days off, but there's, not 8 days in a week. So there was 1 day a week where both teams worked and we called that the double up day because we weren't very imaginative. So on double up nights, people would do one of 2 things. They would either use it as an opportunity to take a personal day or vacation day or whatever, start or extend their weekend, or we double up where we could. As long as we had the minimum number of cars out there, we could put out a couple of 2 officer cars. And I went through the academy with a guy named Steve, and we used to double up almost every time that we were both working on a double up night. And those were some of the most productive shifts I ever had. I mean, we went to jail 7 times in one shift, one day. And we had a couple of nights where we went 6. I mean, and these were not for chippy things. We weren't stopping people for littering, and they're all warrants or felony arrests or whatever. Got into some great, I would call it fun, but adventures, I guess, pursuits and things like this. It's great. It's wonderful. But we got along and we both talked at about the same amount. Like we didn't mind riding around quiet for a little while too. So, but the biggest thing was you got to know your partner. I don't know how that relationship would have gone if we had worked together 4 nights a week instead of 2 nights a month, but boy, those 2 nights of the month were, in the top 10% of my, happiness level for, patrol work. It was, pretty good. So I know there are some departments that have the staffing to put out 2 officer cars, but I think that is uncommon these days.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. So then my last movie that I picked to round up this 3-parter is the movie Rampart, and it takes place in 1999. And it's a corporal played by Woody Harrelson. And it's really, the story really focuses on the end of his career where he's burned out. He's a Vietnam vet and you can tell he's burned out from that. And he's gone through most of his career with the cloud that he killed somebody, and it's your noble cause corruption where he killed somebody because the person was a serial rapist. And they don't really get into the exact circumstances of it, but he kills the guy. And then it just sort of spiral. I think it's that escalator or spiral that you've talked about, Frank, that a little bit of corruption leads into a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And the next thing you know, you're not making these choices for the betterment of society. You're making them fairly much for the betterment of yourself. And I think this movie is maybe the most dramatic of the three. If really, when you look at New Centurions, it's the more realistic of the three. This one's the more dramatic of the three. But I think it uses that drama and a purpose to see a person whose life just goes, it's going on, like truly going over the cliff. It's just the inches up. And then when he goes down that slide to the end, he's going full steam all the way down.
Have you seen this one, Chris?
I think I have. It's been quite some time. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, for me too. I do remember watching it when it came out. I remember how visceral it was. I mean, Woody Harrelson's character was so unlikable but charismatic. I mean, he wasn't like, this wasn't Training Day in Patrol. I mean, it was a completely different kind of movie, and he was like I said, very charismatic, very visceral in his behaviors, just the stuff he was doing in terms of his living situation. And the biggest thing, I guess, was how unrepentant he was. Like, he did what he did and said what he said, and he believed in both, and he wasn't apologizing for it. And, I think that was already becoming problematic back in 2000, whatever it was when this was made. I'd love to see somebody in public service have that attitude today. you wouldn't the last 5 minutes, right?
So it'd be a breath of fresh air, though, if they did, and be like, you know what, I did this at the time, and I stand by it. Look at the results or something. Like something like it would be, as opposed to this, like, kind of constantly apologizing for something that you did before in your life at a different time. Like, it gets, I don't know for you guys, but for me, it's infuriating just constantly having to hear the carousel of like apologies about literally everything. It's just, I don't know. It's very, I just don't like it. I could use a different word, but I don't like it.
I think, though, that in this, that was one of the things that they did in this movie that I thought was kind of interesting is Sigourney Weaver played, I don't know what her role was exactly, if she was somebody from internal affairs or if she was somebody from the DA's office, but she, he always thought that he was this, white knight who had, rid the world of this serial rapist. But then she said, well, when you murdered him, and it all like came out to his wife, and she killed herself. And then the kids went into foster care and they were abused. Like, there's no decision that just that has no consequences to it. And I think if you get into that avenging angel mode, you don't look at the consequences of things. And that's maybe why we have a system that you arrest somebody and maybe everything would have gone all bad for the family as it is. But to have that whole situation, I think that's maybe why we don't have country justice.
So I will quote a very nerdy quote that is not a cop movie quote at all. It's actually from Lord of the Rings. It's J.R.R. Tolkien. And there's a point in which Frodo laments that Bilbo didn't stab and kill Gollum when he had the chance. For those who know the stories or seen the movies, you get the context. But Gollum is creating a whole lot of trouble at this point in time when he says this. And Gandalf said, you're right. He did deserve death, but it was pity that stayed his hand. It was pity and mercy. And he may have deserved death, but some people who die deserve life. And can you give that to them? No, you can't. And so then he says, that's a paraphrase, but the exact quote is something along the lines of, don't be so quick to deal death. Even the wise cannot see all ends. And I always thought that last line was really great, because you go out and try to be the guy meting out street justice, deciding people's fates that are in an extra legal fashion, in a way outside of the system that's in place. And you may get away with it a few times with a positive result. You may make a difference exactly in the way that you intend, but there's going to be a ripple effect in some of these cases that you might end up with a worse situation than you started with. And it's not beyond the fact that it's just not your place to be doing that. But is it even wise to? I mean, at least habitually, the odds say you're going to screw it up at some point, even if you get it right a few times. And so that's just an interesting piece to it, I think.
It's interesting though with like street justice, because like I'm sure if you asked, pull people aside and you ask them like deep down inside, it's like, don't you want Charles Bronson just to go in there and clean up the streets? Don't you want the Punisher to just, go outside the law and just kind of take care of the problems because he's not tied down by any of this stuff? If you honestly ask people, would be like, well, yeah, there's going to be problems, but like if he actually, did take care of the problem, be like, oh yeah, like he was, he might be a vigilante, but look at what he did. Honestly, if you do ask people, I mean, we touched on this with the, like RoboCop. We did the RoboCop series too. This idea of like, yeah, he was working for the police force, but in a lot of ways, he was kind of like a vigilante to a degree. I do think like if you honestly ask people, it's like they want Batman, they want Charles Bronson, they want a Punisher character to come in and just clean up all the junk outside of the entire system. I mean,
unless Batman shows up and kicks your butt and you're the one on the receiving end of Batman, then, and more to the point, unless Batman makes a mistake, right? And that could happen with a human being. I hear what you're saying, Chris. People absolutely have an appetite for it. I mean, one of my more popular books amongst people who I know that are police officers is a book I wrote called The Last Horseman. And the premise is that there are 4 ex-cops who are essentially vigilantes who are fed files from the system of those people who slip through the system, who are they're vetted. They're 100% no doubt guilty. And when the file comes, they slip through the cracks somehow, a technicality or whatever, and they go and exact justice. And man, every cop I know that's ever read that book says how much they love it, because it was born of a cop fantasy mine, right? I mean, that book came into being because I was walking out from the end of shift one night, and I saw one of my sergeants who was looking depressed and staring at the screen. And I was like, hey, Steve, what's going on? Different Steve. And he just relates to me how he was in court and they had a solid case against this child molester, and he got off because somebody didn't file a certain paperwork within a certain window. And he's like, how is that justice? That's a procedural no harm error. And he just was so upset about it. And I just, let him vent and tried to be all lieutenantly about it, and offer some leadership in the situation. And finally he says to me, you know what would be great? What would be great is look at like you and me and Brent and a couple of other guys. And when these cases come out, we just go find this guy and just beat the snot out of him. So he at least gets some justice, man. That would be awesome. But I could never do that. And I said, yeah, neither could I. And then I went home and made some notes about this book because it was such a great idea that he came up with. And because you're right. People do want it, or at least they do think they want it, because they have that sense of justice that I talked about in the previous episode about how it's very refined and in the moment it's very clear, but it's a slippery slope. It is a slippery slope. And I don't think you can rely on, it eventually leads to what? Despotism, right? Because somebody's going to get in charge that isn't noble, and then it's all going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the Woody Harrelson's character in Ramparts, it ate at its soul. I don't see how that couldn't. I think that's how you really do go down that slippery slope is, you're not doing, it's in the theoretical, you say maybe there is that group of cops out there, and like that. And what was it? Dirty Harry Magnum Force was kind of that,
it's the same kind of thing.
And nobody is that virtuous that they can just do it out of pure virtue, because and I think a lot of these movies that we've talked about, the person starts off that's what they're doing it out of the best intentions. They did it to the child molester, and then it turns into the drug dealer, and then it turns down to shaking down the guy who's been doing 35 and a 30, you can go down that road. Really, it opens yourself up to making these moral decisions that I don't think there's really any human who can be completely virtuous once they start going down that road.
Every cop is going to realize at some point in his or her career that I cannot fix this problem in its totality. I am not going to change the world. I might change some people's experience in this world, and I can make an impact, but I'm not going to change it big picture. Crime is going to exist. Drugs are going to exist. All these things are still going to exist. And it's a sobering moment, and it's a depressing moment. And I think if you're already engaged in corrupt behavior, but for a noble reason, so that you could put bad guys that you know are bad guys in jail, when you reach that crisis point where you realize that even if you do that 100,000 times over the course of your career, you're not going to stop the next wave of the ocean coming onto the shore. When you make that realization, if you're already corrupt, the next question that probably comes to mind is, well, if I'm not going to be able to change anything, then maybe at least I can make my own life better somehow. And then you turn the corner, and it's more about that self-enrichment that happens. I don't know for a fact that happens. I'm not telling you that happened to anybody I know, but from just a basic psychological standpoint, it seems to make sense. The first part I know for a fact, every cop makes that realization at some point. They don't necessarily give up. They don't necessarily become, destitute or depressed to the point of not functioning. They just realize that if I'm going to make a difference, it's going to be in more concentrated ways. I'm not going to change the entire game. I'm going to change this play. I'm going to change, this one thing. And so, I do think that realization can affect how corruption occurs. And in this case, with Woody Harrelson character, he kind of defends himself by saying that he's like, I'm an equal opportunity hater. He hates criminals, but he gets into some stuff beyond that isn't about taking bad guys to jail. I think he's reached that point of disillusionment before then. At least that's what I remember. I probably saw it when it came out. So it's been a good 23 years. So if I'm blowing smoke, just feel free to point it out.
No, it's interesting. You brought cops having to come to the conclusion they can only make, say, changes in concentrated ways. I can, not as a cop, but from personal experience, just from growing up, I used to get, really, really upset, and it used to really bother me when I would see injustice. You brought up the example of somebody misfiling paperwork and just injustice in society, government corruption, criminals on the streets, and the list goes on. And I found as I'm getting older, and being the youngest person on this podcast right now, but I am getting older, I have found that I am getting less upset about that type of stuff. I still do get upset about it. But I'm finding that the difference I can make is in personal relationships, where I can strengthen, friendships with the people that I work with, and in particular, younger people, where I find I'm trying to at least make a difference in terms of giving advice to younger people. Hey, I'm older. I've seen a lot of things. I've gone through a lot of things in my life, and I see what you're doing here. And this is not a good idea. And let me explain to you why. And sometimes it makes a difference. Sometimes it doesn't make a difference, but it's a lot more effective than getting upset about, hey, did you hear what was going on in Congress today? There's nothing I can do about that. Right. Or in my case, Parliament, there's nothing I can do about that. They're going to do their thing. I can at least maybe somewhat make a difference in this person's life.
Yeah, you're not going to solve world hunger, but you can open a food bank locally. And I think that from our cops' perspective, I'm not going to stop people from doing crime. I'm not going to stop people from speeding, but I can have a conversation with this person, and maybe they'll slow down, at least in a school zone. You change your perspective, and you change your focus and your emphasis. And, people don't always listen. Sometimes you talk about giving people advice. Sometimes the advice isn't heeded the first time. It takes making the mistake and getting pounded. And then Chris's advice comes back after that. And, oh man, he warned me about this. And then it really takes hold because now they have their own experience to anchor to the advice that you gave them. And they know you're not just, talking out your rear end or whatever. They see the value of it. That happens on the job too. Cops get told things all the time by older cops, and we don't listen when we're young, and then we screw up or we go through the fire, and then we're like, oh wow, that old grinder, that old Kilvinsky guy, you know, he looked a lot like George Patton did, and he knew what he was talking about, you know.
Yeah, the Robert Duvall character, the Kilvinsky character, they knew where they could make a difference, and they knew where it just wasn't worth it. There's a story I had with a student. He just fought everything. Everything would turn into World War III. And I sat him down and I said, there's two ways you can leave this room. You can use your head and bash down the wall right there and walk through the wall, or you can go out the door. Which one's good? The one is going to be a shorter distance, but it's a lot more work. Or you can just take the door. And I think eventually everybody's going to learn that you can get a lot done doing it in an easier way. And that easier isn't even always the way, but more productively. And I think that's what those old timers were trying to instill into the younger ones in Colors and in the new Centurions. I think
walk down that hill, son. Walk down that hill. Don't run down that hill.
The best is when Sean Penn tries to tell that story and he completely screws it up. Like he's not quite there to mentorship.
Yeah.
That's I think of all of those ones, that's the one I would go out for, that I would recommend people go out and watch. It's such a fun movie, and it puts you into that time, that place. They get the music just right. They get that whole thing with the crack and with the gangs and everything. And the world's changed a ton since then. Like, I mean, honestly, Robert Duvall's character might not have even died in nowadays, because he would have been wearing a bulletproof vest, and that might have saved his life. Like, I think there would have been so many different things that would have been different now, but I think you really get to see a really specific time and place and good storytelling too.
Yeah, it was a great movie. Not a huge quote generator. Was no Tombstone or Top Gun in that respect, but I love the Robert Duvall character, and of course Sean Penn is really good at playing a brash young kid in whatever role that might be. So I think it was a good choice. Did you have a quote from it that you wanted to throw out there?
I didn't have a quote, but I think one thing that I noticed with some of the older movies, that it's something, maybe it's My Old Man Coming Out. They had a main character die in those movies. I think that so many of the older movies, they did it to the point of cliche where the main character dramatically dies at the end. But I think that brings you through such an emotional roller coaster, where I think nowadays they're afraid to do that. Maybe because they want to make number 12.
Exactly. You can't make a sequel unless he's going to be a ghost then, right? So.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. So now we're going to dive into Chris's top cop movies. And Chris is, as Mustache Chris is wont to do, has taken things in a little slightly different direction. So let's hear what you got.
Yeah, I picked The Pledge for one of my movies. And I mean, I think people would think, well, that's an odd choice for the theme of like cops behaving badly, or the relationship between cops and criminals that we've been following so far with all the movies that we picked. But I picked this one because it is kind of an odd choice. And basically the general rundown of the movie is it stars Jack Nicholson. It's actually directed by Sean Penn. And Jack Nicholson plays a character, Jerry Black. And at the beginning of the movie, we see like he's retiring, right? He's quite literally going to his retirement party, and he gets stopped. The retirement party gets stopped, and because there was a murder of a little girl, I guess within his district. So he goes out and investigates it, and they find the girl, and then they go and inform the parents, and he promises the parents that it's the last thing I do that I'm going to find who murdered your little daughter. They get this Native American guy who has who's special needs. I believe he's it's not Down syndrome he has, but he's special needs. He's slow. I don't know what the right term is, but that's how I would describe it. And his partner kind of corroses like a confession out of him. But Jerry Black, he doesn't believe he doesn't believe this confession. And the Native American guy ends up killing himself. But the department and his partner and important things like, it's open shut case. He's the guy that did it. It's done. Jerry ends up retiring, and he asks unofficially, can I, investigate this case that I still think is unsolved? And the chief of police said, you know what? Okay, we'll allow you to do that. And he ends up buying like a gas station nearby where the little girl was actually murdered, and he starts doing his own investigation. But what we see clearly that's going on here is he is becoming obsessed with the case. Much of his career, we get the impression that he's just obsessed with his job. He's not married, doesn't have any kids, and through his obsession in trying to solve this case, he puts innocent people in danger. He befriends like a local girl. She's like a waitress, and takes a liking to her daughter and invites them to live with him after there's a domestic dispute. And he ends up actually using her daughter as bait to get this child murderer that he's convinced that there's like a serial child murderer going around, and everyone thinks he's nuts. But they respect him because he was a really good detective for most of his career, and he's older. So a lot of them kind of look at him like as a father figure. And he sets up this whole scenario where he's going to entrap this child killer that he's convinced is going to come here, based on the evidence that he was able to gather. Because like this killer or whatever gave them like these little paper birds. I believe at the original crime scene, they actually did find this paper bird there too. And that's how he makes the connection. And he gets all his cop friends to come and, get ready. We're going to bust this actual child murderer. And what ends up happening is Jerry's actually right that there was a serial child murderer, but on the way to going to get the girl or go to the trap, he dies in a car crash, and all we see is like a shot of his burning body in the car crash. And obviously no one shows up to his trap. Everyone's you're insane. What's the matter with you? I mean, Jerry is, during the movie, you see that he is kind of slowly losing his mind. I believe it could be something like Alzheimer's. And we pan away and we see Jerry by himself, talking to himself about, how he was right and he was right there. And it's a really depressing thought to have because, yes, Jerry was obsessed with doing the right thing to a degree, but he didn't care enough about the people around him because he put the people around him in danger. But at the end of the day, he was right. There was this child murderer, and it was just a freak accident, the car crash, that he's going to die with everyone thinking that he's lost his mind and there wasn't this child killer about, but there actually was. And if Buddy had finished drinking his coffee in the morning, he would have shown up there and Jerry would have been right, and they would have actually been able to catch the killer of many of these girls that they had been finding. And that just doesn't happen. It's interesting to think that like maybe a cop is right about something, like is deadly right about something, but he's not able to separate it. So he becomes so obsessed with it that it ends up destroying his life. I'm sure there's many scenarios where this happened, where he's convinced that there's something going on and he's unable to directly prove it. And his partners and chief of police and what have you, ends up thinking maybe he's going crazy, or he ends up having to leave the police force. And what if that person ended up actually being right the entire time?
I think you bring up a couple of really awesome points with this movie. And I'll be honest with you, I don't remember this movie. And I'm sure I saw it. I would have had to have seen it because it's Jack Nicholson at the time when I was watching movies all the time. And what a supporting cast. Holy cow. If you read the names of the other people in this movie that you chose, it's just such an incredible array of actors. And Sean Penn is an excellent director too. But there are two things that jumped out at me as you were talking about this, Chris. The smaller of them was just that the randomness of the world is on display, much like when we were talking about colors and Steve talked about who actually shot Robert Duvall's character and how it was kind of random. Like in my comment then was the streets don't care, they don't care about you and your relationships. And fate is what fate is, or randomness or chaos, or however you want to put it. And that's what happens here, right? Just some random chaotic event, and you can't account for that. But the larger piece that I heard as you were describing this film, it ties into a movie I talked about before, and that is Training Day, where in Training Day, you have Denzel Washington's Alonzo Harris say, you want to catch the wolf, you got to be a wolf, basically, right? And there are people in society who would say, yeah, you do. I want my cops to be wolves so they can catch the wolves. It's necessary. Well, in this movie, you've got a cop who's obsessive about his cases. And if you went and asked somebody, how do you want your detective to be? A lot of them would be very okay with that. Most of them probably, because he's going to find the bad guy. He's going to hunt him down. He's never going to quit. I'll tell you right now, common sense, tenacity, and an ability to notice things in an open-minded way are three traits that detectives need to have in spades and that they need to be able to draw upon if they're going to solve cases over long periods of time. I mean, that's in addition to all of the basic foundational skill sets that you have to have. This obsessive nature is just like the dark side of tenacity, isn't it? And as a society, we would applaud that because he's going to get his man. He's going to get this guy. And if he hadn't gotten that car wrecked, as you point out, Chris, he would have got him. But look at the toll that takes on the individual. Look at the price that's paid. So as where Alonzo Harris, or even in Copland, their failure, their negative way of doing something that society wants, in Training Day, it affects the society. It affects the citizenry, the community, right? In this, it's turned inward. It affects the individual, affects the cop himself rather than the cop affecting the community. But it's just as dark. It's just as dark as what Alonzo was doing. It's just who's being affected by it. And in both cases, I think you would have a segment of society who, to at least a certain point before they got off the exit of the freeway, would drive right along with it. And they would say, this guy, Jerry, this detective that Nicholson played, that's who I want looking for my kid if my kid went missing. So I'm really fascinated that you chose this film.
The part that always really gets to me in this movie is I could be, say I happen to go by that gas station. I'm talking to Jerry and he starts talking to me. He's like, I had this guy, like I was right there. And, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, this guy's insane. And yet he's not, though. Like he's telling the truth. The guy was right there. And I'm sitting there as an individual myself, justifiably thinking this guy's lost his mind. But he really hasn't lost his mind. Everybody else is just blind to the actual truth. He almost had this guy. And how many times in society do we think that, though, where we think somebody's insane, and then we come to maybe realize later that, actually they weren't that insane. Or maybe people just never realized that. And it's this slippery slope of like how hard it is how easily you can lose the truth. And it could be just something as simple as, like you pointed out, a freak accident. And then all of a sudden the truth it's just gone.
I always go back to Frank's movie Copland. Being right isn't a bulletproof vest. And he was right, but you don't win every time. And I think that that's one of the things that he suffered, and he was right. But that didn't mean that he was going to, at the end of the day, get a medal for cracking the case. And I think different people handle that differently. And some people, it really does break them that because maybe it isn't for notoriety, but maybe he just wants people to know the truth. But to quote another Jack Nicholson movie, you can't handle the truth.
Oh yeah, and it's like just the movie itself. Like I honestly, I suggest everyone to watch it. It's one of those movies that I don't know. I guess it's been forgotten over time. But it's a really emotional movie, and I mean, if you're a thinking person, you'll get what I'm saying about just the slippery nature of the truth, and you'll go on this journey with this cop where at one moment you're like, you're totally with this guy, like he's obsessed, he's going to catch this guy, and then you start realizing some of the stuff he's doing, like he's putting another little kid in danger, he's sacrificing a potentially healthy relationship with this girl and her daughter, because he's so obsessed to crack this case. He basically, he gave his life to the police force and trying to protect innocent people, but in the process he ends up putting innocent people in danger and ends up destroying his own life. It's not an easy watch. It's a very depressing movie, and Mickey Rourke has a quick cameo appearance in it. And Mickey Rourke is, when he's on, honestly, he's probably one of the best actors in Hollywood. And then this little 5-minute scene that he has in there where he's talking about, because one of his daughters was one of the ones that were killed. It's heartbreaking to watch. And I find a lot of these cop movies and just crime shows in general, it's all about like the CSI type stuff, where it's just like, oh, how are we going to solve this case? And like with Criminal Minds, and it's like, oh, like this guy was doing this. And I found that the Pledge really brings home just the personal trauma that comes with the crimes of this nature, but just crime in general, like the toll it takes on people who are directly involved in it and the people around it and the people trying to solve the problem. I find with like a lot in this genre, they try to make it seem it's like, oh, it's like a cat and mouse game, and there's aspects of that in this movie, but it's not the focus. It's about the toll that criminality takes on everyone, really.
Well, and you quoted the other Jack Nicholson line of, you can't handle the truth there a minute ago. Was it you, Steve, that said that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's another line from that same speech that applies to this movie too, right? Where he says, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. And that applies to this character, the detective that he plays in The Pledge, it sounds like to me. I mean, that obsessive, compulsive, tenacious sort of personality is exactly who you want. I mean, if your kid was stolen, but again, there's a price. There's always a price. And, it sounds like they depicted that really well in this movie. Now, I did not see it recently, so I don't have a quote from it. So I am going to do a fun fact instead. Chris, did you know this was actually filmed largely in BC?
I didn't know that, but if you told me that, I would have been, I'm not shocked. I just like it looked like it was filmed in the Pacific Northwest, like around that area.
Yeah, it was around. It was all in the interior of BC, except for the exterior shots that they filmed in Reno to set it. But they shot it in a bunch of small towns I've never heard of. And I actually know BC fairly well from traveling up there for hockey and stuff. So yeah, it's fun fact instead of a quote.
Yeah, BC is interesting. People, when they think of British Columbia, I don't know how many Americans actually do think about British Columbia. When they do, they think of like Vancouver and stuff. People don't realize just how like woody, like the wilderness in BC, like they don't get it, right? Like it's George. Really, we have our hillbillies in Canada too, and they live in BC. And those areas, I'm telling you, like I personally haven't been there, but I've heard stories, and yeah, it can get like really hillbilly-esque in certain parts of British Columbia.
I don't have a quote either, but another Mickey Rourke where he made a really short but impactful cameo was in this movie called Man of God. And it was a Greek movie in English about a Greek religious person. And the last literally 2 minutes, Mickey Rourke is in it, and he absolutely made the movie in just 2 minutes. And he makes a lot of stinkers too, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, he's up and down.
But boy, like Chris said, when he's up,
yeah,
you know, when you get your Angel Heart and you're the wrestler and movies like this, I mean, that's some pretty powerful acting. Did you have a favorite quote from the movie, Chris? I mean, were there any like quotables?
Not like a favorite quote per se. I mean, I would say my favorite scene, even though like if favorite's like, I guess is a weird word to use, is just that shot of Jerry muttering to himself and like shaking his hand, and the camera's panning out, and you see, oh, this is how it ends. It's no one's actually going to know the truth, and Jerry's going to sit here and slowly go insane for the rest of his life.
Sounds devastating.
You know, it is a very, I guess that I suggest everyone watch it. Like it's one of those movies that I just think has slowly been forgotten about. And, yeah, go out and watch it when you guys listen to this podcast.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Now, your second one is a really interesting movie, and it's on theme, but it also it has it's a little different too, and that's The Departed, another Jack Nicholson movie. How does that make your list?
I didn't even realize I picked 2 Jack Nicholson movies. That didn't it's not on me right now. Maybe I should have picked a third one where he plays something with cops. Should have picked. I'm trying to think of what am I? Chinatown. He's not a
Chinatown.
Cop, yeah. He's a detective per se, but I know I picked
the theme for Steve too with the LA setting.
Yeah. I picked The Departed because I enjoyed this movie, and I thought honestly there's a lot of people who really enjoy this movie. I know Steve doesn't really enjoy it all that much, or thinks it's somewhat overrated. To be honest with you, I do prefer Black Mass just because it's more, but we'll talk about that I guess in a little bit. But yeah, I picked The Departed because it just touches on a lot of themes, and it's somewhat loosely based on a true story. Like, I'm assuming most people have seen The Departed, so because it was such a big movie when it did come out. The Departed is somewhat loosely based on Whitey Bulger. The character played by Jack Nicholson is supposed to be Whitey Bulger, and people aren't familiar with Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger was a famous organized crime figure in South Boston, which is where The Departed takes place. And what makes Whitey Bulger interesting, there's a lot of organized crime figures in the history of Boston, especially South Boston, but Whitey Bulger was actually an FBI informant for most of his criminal career. And it somewhat worked out the way that it's depicted in the movie The Departed, where Matt Damon's character grew up in South Boston, idolized Jack Nicholson's character, and became a police officer. Well, more than a police officer, ended up working for the FBI, and made Jack Nicholson and I gotta correct you. I gotta correct you there that he went to work for the Massachusetts State Police.
Oh yes, sir. Yes, yeah. He didn't work for the FBI.
Mixed up.
Yeah. The character.
In the real story, he went to work for the FBI, but it was Leonardo DiCaprio's character he became a statey, I think. Is that how it?
Both of them were staties. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so he ends up tipping them off on information. I'm sorry, Matt Damon's character, because he idolized him, and there's a whole history about that with how South Boston's almost like a country on and of itself for a big chunk of its history. And then with Leonardo DiCaprio's character, we kind of get a glimpse into the potential problems of undercover police work, because as you're watching the movie, Leonardo DiCaprio's committing various crimes, and I get it because he's an undercover cop and he has to, fit in to be able to get to Jack Nicholson's character. But in the process of doing that, he is committing crimes. He's setting buildings on fire. He's beating people up. He's doing extortion. pretty much everything short of like actual murder. But he's
party to that too, though. Remember?
Yeah.
Him and French go into that one place, and French kills that guy.
Yeah. He wasn't like, I mean, he didn't participate in per se, right? But there is that famous scene where he's talking to his handlers, and he's saying like, we literally have this guy on murder. Like, what are you guys doing? And that's always like, I've said this to me, like, even when I watched the movie and I didn't know it was kind of based on Whitey Bulger, I said, yeah, that would have been the moment where I go, yeah, I'm out. If you're not bringing them in at this point, there's something else going on here. You literally have them on murder. What else do you need? But it raises a lot of those themes. And then the nature of informants, because I guess, spoiler alert, by the end of it, we find out that Jack Nicholson's character has been an informant for the FBI this entire time, which is what happened with Whitey Bulger before they actually decided to start going after him. And there was a huge manhunt. They start realizing it's like, wait a minute, this guy's his handler's basically been protecting him this entire time. And he's been tipping them off about people ratting and telling stories, which have led to like multiple murders. It's like, oh, how did this happen? And it shows you like how quickly like the informant system can be abused. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover himself was not a big fan of undercover work for obvious reasons. He goes, well, I mean, if you're going to do undercover work, like you're going to have to commit the crimes to fit in for them to actually buy that you're who you say you are. And the nature of the problems, if you say using informants, is they can easily lie, or they can easily not give you good information, or they can, by lying, covering up their own crimes.
Yeah, look at Donnie Brasco. I mean, look at what he had to do to maintain his cover. And certainly Billy Costigan, the character that Leonardo DiCaprio plays, he's present for a murder, and he's doing all kinds of crimes, lower level crimes. And you can see it's taken a toll on him. I mean, when he goes to see that psychologist, which obviously that's pretty contrived that they both talk to the same psychologist, blah, blah, blah. But how busted up he is about it, and how he's asking for, something to help him sleep and to cope. I think that's pretty realistic. I mean, he knows what he just did is wrong, but, and he's being forced to continue to do it. And, Quinnen and what's Donnie Wahlberg's character's name? The sergeant, who's a smart aleck through the whole movie. They don't pull him out when like you said, they had any number of charges on him. So I would be going crazy if that were me. Undercover work. I've done undercover work for like hours at a time. That's all the experience I had. And it's nerve wracking for, 3 hours to pretend you're somebody else and to delve into that world. And it's a completely different experience, and not necessarily a pleasant one. I can't imagine doing it for the period of time that this character had to.
Well, and then you're watching, like I'm saying, like you're a police officer. You signed up to I don't want to not commit crimes, really. Like that's the majority. You want to stop crimes, and then you become an undercover police officer, and you're participating in the crimes. You have no choice, because I mean, your life's at risk too. Like if you're not like helping with committing the crimes, they're going to be like, who's this guy? Is he a cop? Is he a rat? What's going on here? And you could easily get, the crap kicked out of you or killed in some circumstances. Like if you're a witness to a murder and they're like, oh, this guy could be a cop, they're just going to kill you right there. I mean, I wouldn't even like besmirch them to a degree. I'm like, this is what they do. And this guy's a cop and he just watched us do it. Like we're all going to go to jail for life if this guy talks. Right. So like, I get it to a degree. I obviously think it's abhorrent, but I mean, is it fair to be putting police officers in those circumstances? I think you have to volunteer to do this type of work. Like it's not assigned to you, but even somebody volunteers. I mean, somebody can volunteer to go to Vietnam too. I mean, was it really fair to be sending them into those jungles and with like no real like plan in place or rhyme or reason other than we're just going to bomb the crap out of something and then just like, oh yeah, just go into the jungle. It's not, there's a part of me that feels like it's not fair, but there's also a part of me, it's like, it's necessary work to really kind of get to the information. I mean, one of the biggest, successful, you pointed out with Donnie Brasco, one of the most successful operations in terms of the mafia and just collecting information, not so much per se with arrests, but a fair amount of people were arrested too, was Donnie Brasco, right? Joe Pistone going undercover for many years and infiltrating the Bonanno family almost up until the point where, he was going to get made, and he actually pushed against the FBI, didn't want him to get made. And Joe was like, I'm right there. They're going to make me. Just, let me do it. And they pulled him out at that point.
Frank, in your experience, was that sort of deep cover type thing? Was that something that it's more common for the feds and the state authorities to do that sort of thing than a local police department?
I think it's more common for a larger agency because they have the resources to support it. And yes, it usually is, you're targeting something big most of the time. I mean, going undercover for a shift and buying drugs and pretending you're a drug user and doing street hand to hands. I mean, that's undercover, but it's not deep undercover. It's not what you're talking about here. And so what you're talking about here has an overarching goal that's pretty ambitious. And so it requires the person to be undercover for a longer period of time. And it's more dangerous. You're working without a net most of the time. I mean, one thing that you do in an undercover operation that's a short-term one is you can control the situation a lot more and provide for a lot more safety for your undercover operative. If they're walking up to the corner to buy drugs, you can have the corner covered. You can have a ready response car. You can have a video camera rolling. You can have an earpiece in to warn them if somebody's walking up behind them. I mean, there's things you can do. You put somebody undercover like Donnie Brasco, well, Joe Pistone, but in that scenario, or in the fictional scenario of Billy Costigan here in The Departed. And, they are totally working without a net. They are on their own. And that has a stress level to it that I think has got to be off the charts. I mean, and again, it's kind of shown in how Costigan, relates to the psychologist. But it's like you said, Chris, there are some goals. There are some things that you might want to accomplish that can only be accomplished through undercover work. And you accept the danger as the officer and as the organization, and you accept that there may be some smaller transgressions that take place in order to achieve the greater good. But it's far more regimented and far more, there are a lot of rules in place and safety precautions and checks and balances in the real world than in a lot of the more ambitious films that want to, hype up the drama. And certainly the further back you go, you can play a little faster and loose and be a little closer to reality. But to answer your question directly, Steve, I think it is a larger department, maybe a state or a federal department, or a large department that has a task that they see that is going to take a lot of work to take down. And not uncoincidentally, organized crime is one of those things, which speaks directly to the core topic of your show.
And not being a lawyer or a cop or anything like that, I think that somebody like Donnie Brasco, he kind of like kept slipping deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But I would personally think that, with my very limited knowledge, that you start getting somebody too in deep and they start making those, they start doing those little crimes. It kind of opens up the prosecution to problems of chain of evidence and all that sort of thing when they get too deep into it. Well, Mr. Brasco, Agent Pistone, where were you when that murder was committed? And, that sort of thing where I think that, and that's what I think the FBI was getting to when they didn't want him to be made. Like, you put somebody on the stand, you were made in the mafia. Where exactly did you stand in this?
And how did you manage to do that?
Yeah. In The Departed situation, where not only was he undercover, he was also working for the the Jack Nicholson, Whitey Bulger character. So he was working all three sides of the fence.
And it's interesting too, because when Chris points out that this mirrors the Whitey Bulger scenario and that Nicholson was absolutely modeled after him, it's actually also an adaptation from a Hong Kong film called Infernal Affairs that mirrors the storyline very closely. There's some deviations and so forth, and there's a couple of good videos on YouTube that highlight what those differences are. But when they said it in Boston, obviously they said, well, there's a lot of local Boston history that we need to work into this. And all the Whitey Bulger stuff obviously was what they plugged in.
The crazy fact about this movie is like Whitey Bulger was on the run still from the FBI when this movie came out, so he could very well have watched this movie that was somewhat loosely, it's very loosely based on his life to a degree, and sit there and just like watch Jack Nicholson kind of play a fake version of him. He was still on the run at the time. They only caught him when he was like an old man. And then he was like brutally murdered in prison. But I mean, I guess we'll save that for like a whole another series. That's going to be like Whitey Bulger is going to be a huge series. But I want to catch it. Like you worked with informants, right? And
sure.
I mean, how reliable it could be such a slippery slope where like you think this guy's feeding you good information, but like, is he actually really feeding you useful information or not? Like, how do you discern that?
Well, the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, you always want to independently verify what you're told. And in order to use a witness or a CI, in order to use a confidential informant as the basis for probable cause to get a search warrant or to arrest somebody, you have to prove that they have that knowledge, and you have to be able to prove that they have a track record of being truthful and accurate, right? You can't just say, yeah, some guy named Chris told me that Steve was slinging dope, so I want to take the door. I have to be able to say, well, Chris is a user. He's bought from that house before. Chris has provided me information on 3 separate occasions that I have confirmed to be accurate. You have to go through this process of essentially qualifying the informant. And if they're going to be an official CI, there's actually a CI contract that that people will have their CI sign. There's basically call it what you want. It's basically a code of ethics, basically thou shalt not list, that they have to abide by. And so I'm not telling you that people don't have informal snitches. They certainly do. But to get to the point where they're actually a confidential informant, then it's a little bit more involved. And to know if they're telling the truth, again, it's because they've told you the truth and you verified it. So you're just hoping that, this 6th instance of them giving the information is also true because the first 5 were true. Best indicator of future performance is past performance, right?
Just out of curiosity, how would a department figure out whether a cop is basically running protection for an informant? In this movie in particular, like the cop, like Jack Nicholson's character, Whitey Bulger, was an informant. He was giving them information to a degree, but it wasn't, a lot of the times it wasn't very useful information. But he had an FBI handler that was running protection for him. And how does a department go about finding out whether this is happening with the police officer? He's running protection for an informant. Maybe the guy was a high school friend, or maybe he's giving him a little bit of cash underneath the table, or maybe the cop's got a drug problem or something, and he's hooking him up. How do they find out whether the information that the cop is claiming he's giving them is good information? It's leading to like other arrests. And all he'd have to do as the informant is just give enough to maybe maybe somebody's getting arrested, but in actuality, it's just all a front for something else. I mean, how do they go about investigating that?
Well, that's a multi-layered question and probably too big for this discussion here. but the one piece that you kind of went to there at the end, it only takes one time for an informant to give bad information and for the officer to act on that information and get burned, particularly if other cops are present and see that. to sour that relationship. You might get away with one mishap like that if you've got a really good excuse and a real good track record. But you burn me twice and we're done. And I'll probably put you on my, give no quarter list, as well. So it really all comes down to, Chris, the facts of it, right? You just see, did this person give good information or not? And that answers the question. And toward the idea of a cop covering for an informant or something, I mean, it's a real great scenario for fiction. I haven't encountered it really happening in my career. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but my answer would be the same. I mean, I would expect that this sort of thing would eventually become apparent. I mean, even in the movie, when Matt Damon is fiddling with his phone and texting Jack Nicholson, and he gets a text, and Billy Costigan sees him get a text and then immediately make his decision to do something. When he goes and talks to Queenan, and I still can't remember the Wahlberg character's name, which is bugging me. But when he goes and talks to them for a debrief on this incident, he's going to point that out, that he got a text or something and he changed the plan and they did this. If anybody was suspicious or saw Matt Damon's character doing something, they're going to start to be suspicious. And once somebody's suspicious of something and they start looking at it, most conspiracies don't hold up once people start actually opening the cupboards and peeking under the rug and so forth. So I think the truth would out in most agencies pretty quickly if somebody was doing that.
You know what I thought was great about the movie, and I think it made it exciting, but it also was sort of a failure at the end, is that Whitey Bulger at that point in 2006, that was one of the great mysteries of, you could rank that with where did Amelia Earhart go, and where did, were they all Elvis and Jimi Hendrix and them living on an island somewhere? That's how, with DB Cooper flying the plane, that was how gone he was in 2006. He was on Unsolved Mysteries. That was one of the things. And then to me, that was sort of the fail at the end of the movie, is because Scorsese didn't seem to know how to end it. And then what was it? I think in 2012, did they catch him? Something like that. And then, so we know now what the rest of the story is. So I think that was kind of that was what made the movie so exciting when it came out. But then the ending kind of fell flat, because I don't feel like it was a satisfying ending to it. It was kind of an action ending.
Yeah, he gets shot up and then they find out that he's an informant. I'm not going to disagree with that. The ending's a little anticlimactic, but the rest of the movie, the pace of it's just great. It just kind of rolls along. And I know you said you're not a huge fan of it, but I enjoy it. Especially when Leonardo DiCaprio's character dies, it was just such a kick in the balls sort of. But it's the truth, right?
It was a good shock moment, right?
Yeah, it's whoa. But then it's not just shocking for the sake of shocking. It actually makes sense in terms of this movie. It really does.
Maybe I'll upset the audience here, but I think one of the things that I didn't like about The Departed, or one of the things that stuck in my craw, is Matt Damon's one of my poison pill actors. I guess I have quite a bit of a list. Chris knows that Nicolas Cage is one of them, but when some certain actors are in a movie, it sets a high bar for me to like it, and Matt Damon's one of them.
Really? That's interesting. I think he's a pretty good actor.
I got I'm not as bad as Steve. I'm not a huge fan of his, but I'm a huge fan of Leonardo DiCaprio. So I love his acting. I think he's great. Right.
You didn't like Good Will Hunting, Steve?
No, I liked everything except for him. I think there's something about Matt Damon that he's always Matt Damon. I never really believe him that he's, even in Elysium, where he played, was he a cyborg or he was something? He just seemed like Matt Damon. I don't know what it is.
A science fiction Matt Damon.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's
Good Will Hunting also have a soft spot in my heart, because there's that scene with Robin Williams' character, and he's talking about how his wife passed away, and that was his life was over at that point. And not to get too personal, it's just after my mom passed away, what have you. And then I could see, even young age, I could see it on my dad's face, right? Like life was just never going to be the same again. And
pretty devastating.
I don't know, that scene just really it's just really touching. I enjoy the movie. I somewhat agree with Matt Damon's acting, though. I find it's kind of like The Rock to a degree, where I'm like, I don't know.
Oh my God. No way is it like The Rock. Come on.
No. I'm saying like, it's almost like I'm seeing his, it's almost like, let me explain that fully.
Are you saying his persona comes through no matter what? Is that kind of the point?
It's the same thing, and kind of again and again. Like, I've seen Matt Damon act, and it's good, but it's the same, right? Like, I don't see a range of acting where, like, you compare Leonardo DiCaprio in this movie and you watch Leo, and he's very different in pretty much every movie that he's in. And it's one reason, I mean, Steve might hate Nicolas Cage. And to me, like, one of the reasons I do like Nicolas Cage is I never know what to expect when I watch one of his movies. You know, it's either it's going to be a train wreck or it's going to be Leaving Las Vegas. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be one or the other, right? And I just find, like, with Matt Damon, it's very safe, his acting, right? And that's the reason I kind of brought up The Rock. Like, you watch The Rock's movies and they're like, okay, they're entertaining, but they're very safe. Like, no one's going to remember any of these Rock movies that have come out like the way they remember The Predator or Terminator or Total Recall. They're just not going to remember them because they're so polished and they're so safe.
They're very vanilla. They're very vanilla. Yeah. But I don't think the same is true of Matt Damon's movies. I mean, The Talented Mr. Ripley, I mean, that's completely different than any of these other movies. I mean,
I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, because you don't like him. So it makes sense that you wouldn't see him. And just going back to The Departed, you have to admit he's pretty damn good in this movie. I mean, whether you like him or not, he plays the role really well. Now, I can see what you're saying. He kind of plays Matt Damon really well. If Matt Damon were a statey sergeant, I get what you're saying. And he does do that sometimes. I'm not going to deny it. But I do think he has more range than you're giving him credit for. Is there a favorite line from this movie for either of you? Do you have a favorite line? Since it's your movie, Chris, you want to go first?
That scene with Leonardo DiCaprio, I can't remember the exact line, where he's talking to Martin Sheen and Marky Mark, and he's saying, we literally have him on tape committing murder. Why haven't you brought him in yet? And it's like, and I'm watching that movie for the first time, like, murder. You have him on murder. Like, what else could you possibly need? And they don't do anything about it. That would have been, I'm sitting there watching the movie, I'm like, that would have been the second. I'm like, I'm out because there's something else going on here.
There are a number of YouTube videos online you can look up that talk about why The Departed is not a good movie. And that is one of the things that they hammer on is that doesn't make any sense. How about you, Steve?
I don't have a quote as such, but I think this is one of those Scorsese movies that has take or leave Matt Damon, but otherwise like such a great cast and a young cast too. A young Mark Wahlberg, young Matt Damon, Leonardo DiCaprio was young. Like, all of these guys were young, and Jack Nicholson was still pretty young at that point. And I think that the movie had a lot of energy to it.
Yeah, that's the best part of the film is the pacing. Like, it's go, 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 go. It's like the Dropkick Murphys song that's famous in the movie. It's just has a pace to it, like almost like a punk rock song, you know? It's just like get from one, even though the movie is like, I think it's almost 3 hours, I think. It's just, it doesn't feel like that though. It doesn't feel like that when you're watching it. The pacing is probably the best, just from a technical standpoint, is the best part of the film, in my opinion.
I love how they rag on the firemen early on when they're playing rugby. It's pretty funny listening to him rip on the firemen there. And I also like where he says that the Irish are impervious to psychoanalysis. It's that whole scene is pretty funny. But I got to tell you that Mark Wahlberg's character, it's Dingnam, Sergeant Dingnam. He has some of the best lines, and maybe the very best one is where somebody says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm the guy who does his job. You must be the other guy."
Oh yeah,
that line kills me.
Mark Wahlberg is one of those type of actors too, where he's like, I wouldn't say he's like a great actor, but like in a role like that where he has to play the tough cop from Boston, he's phenomenal at it. I mean, his brother's made an entire career out of it. Donnie, I think, basically just playing Boston cop, right?
Yeah, well, he was in Band of Brothers too, as Donnie Wahlberg was. He played Sergeant Lipman, something like that, and he was briefly in Sixth Sense too.
Yeah, he was really good at like that. Was out way. I didn't even know it was him.
Yeah, this was a good film though.
Oh, I was going to say, Don, he was also in the Saw movies too. I think he was like 3 of them.
Oh my God.
I know that's not for everybody, but he's
talk about range.
He was a 3. He plays a cop in that one though. He plays like kind of basically Mark Wahlberg's cop kind of in The Departed, where he's just like this hard-nosed like detective.
Well, these were interesting choices, really, Chris, because like The Pledge is one I had not remembered. And I think you hit on some really great themes in there. And The Departed could be, I mean, you can take it or leave it. You can like it or not. It has some complex things woven inside of it. And you could decide it's about X, and X could be any of about 5 different things. And you could definitively make a case that most academics would agree, yeah, that's what it's about. And you'd have some good support for your arguments. And it is a fun movie. I did watch it recently, within the last year. And I did find that it didn't hold up quite as well as previous watchings, but that happens sometimes.
It's funny you brought up like people push back against the scene where Leonardo DiCaprio says like you literally have him on murder, and people said like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, I mean, in the Whitey Bulger case, like they knew like Whitey Bulger was like, they had a pretty good idea that he was committing murders too, and they didn't do anything about that at the time either. So I mean, it's not that far-fetched.
Great soundtrack, too.
Scorsese always has incredible soundtracks. I mean, that's one thing that no matter what, he always has the perfect song for the perfect moment.
Mm-hmm. That voiceover that Nicholson does while Gimme Shelter's playing at the beginning, that really gets the movie going. Good choices, Chris. I'm thumbs up on your choices here.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. Thanks to Mustache Chris and Frank for joining us. And I think we really, we've looked at the movie qualities. We've looked at the bigger story. I think there's a lot to get out of these episodes. And if people want more of movies, I definitely like talking about movies, and I think you can tell that Frank and Mustache like to talk movies. Let's head out with just one more. What's your honorable mention that maybe one day we can do an honorable mention show? For me, it's a really weird one. I think it would have fit well into Chris's list, is the movie Dragged Across Concrete with Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn. It was completely fictionalized, and it was very weird, and it was very crime noir, but it was a really fun movie.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that one in terms of cops behaving badly, because it's a great movie. Everything that director has done, I'm trying to remember his name right now, it's just been amazing. Like he did Tomahawk, I believe, or Bone Tomahawk, and he also did Cell Block, was it 99?
Right, Cell Block 99.
And those 3 movies are just incredible. It's amazing. It's just the themes of the films are just so anti what goes on in Hollywood right now. It's such a fresh air. Everything that this guy, the director's done, especially Dragged Across Concrete. There's some scenes in that movie I'm like, how did this movie get made? Like this needs to get made, but how did this get made in this environment? I don't know how, but it's definitely worth watching, guys.
So what's yours? Who wants to jump in? What's your honorable mention?
Right, Chris.
Trying to think of one. Oh, I was going to say The French Connection. And I was going to do it initially for the 3, but I ended up cutting it out. I think we're going to save it for something later. But yeah, French Connection is probably one of my top 5 favorite movies. William Friedkin's also one of my favorite directors. off air, we were talking about how I just like his approach to filmmaking. And, sometimes it's a huge hit like The Exorcist or The French Connection. And sometimes it's not so good, but, I appreciate the fact that he's willing to take risks. So
I was buzzing through a bunch of them, sitting here trying to decide which I'd name. I mean, I was thinking of To Live and Die in LA, Manhunter, one I know Chris likes, Narc. But I think if we're doing a little more eclectic films that are police related films that are like you're saying, Chris, that need to be watched and watched with some intelligent intent, I'm going to go with Lone Star. It's a movie directed by John Sayles. It has Chris Christopherson in it. Matthew McConaughey's in it. And I can't remember the actor's name right now. That's actually the main character. You've seen him before as a character actor. He has kind of his face is a little bit ruddy, and he's always the second or third billing, but he's the lead in this movie. It takes place in Texas, and I'll leave it at that. If we do end up talking about it, it's a really good piece of filmmaking and storytelling with some great acting.